There's a person you know who seems untouchable, not arrogant, not cold, just steady. When everyone else is losing their minds, they're calm. When drama explodes around them, they don't even flinch. When someone tries to provoke them, it's like watching someone throw stones at water. The stones just sink and the surface goes still again. You've probably wondered, how do they do it? Are they hiding something? Are they pretending? Are they just naturally wired differently? Here's what I discovered. They're not pretending. They're not hiding. And they weren't born different. They learned something that most people never learn, something the ancient Stoics called the art of being unbothered. And in the next hour, I'm going to teach you exactly what they know. But first, let me ask you this. How many times this week did you let someone steal your peace? How many times did you replay a conversation that went wrong? How many times did you feel your body tense up because someone looked at you sideways, or didn't text back, or said something that hit you the wrong way? If you're honest, and I know you will be because we're just talking here, it happened more than once, didn't it? Maybe it happened today. Maybe it's happening right now as you're listening to this, thinking about that one person who always knows exactly how to push your buttons. Here's the thing that's going to change everything for you. The problem isn't them. The problem isn't the world. The problem isn't even the situation. The problem is that nobody ever taught you how to be unshakable from the inside out. But what if I told you that 2,000 years ago, a slave named Epictetus figured out exactly how to do this? What if I told you he developed a system so powerful that it worked in Roman dungeons, on ancient battlefields, and in the courts of emperors? And what if I told you that same system works today, in your office, in your relationships, in your own mind when it's spinning out of control at 2 a.m.? In the next 70 minutes, we're going to walk through 8 keys to Stoic silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of strength. The silence that comes from being so grounded in who you are that nothing can shake you loose. By the time we're done, you'll understand why the most powerful people in any room are often the quietest ones. You'll know exactly what to do when someone tries to bait you into a reaction. You'll have a toolkit for staying calm when everyone else is losing it. And most importantly, you'll discover that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, one moment of conscious choice at a time. This isn't about becoming emotionless. It's not about becoming passive. It's about becoming unshakable. It's about learning to act as if nothing bothers you until, gradually, almost nothing does. So get comfortable, settle in. Because what we're about to explore together isn't just philosophy. It's practical wisdom that will change how you move through the world. And trust me, the person you become by the end of this journey will be someone you barely recognize. Someone stronger, calmer, and more in control than you thought possible. Let's begin. Here's something that will blow your mind. The last time you got upset, angry, or hurt, the thing that bothered you wasn't actually what happened. It was what you told yourself about what happened. Let me prove it to you with a story. Imagine you're walking down a hallway at work. As you pass a group of colleagues, they suddenly stop talking and look at you. One of them smirks. Another quickly looks away. Your stomach drops immediately. Now, what just happened in your body? Your heart rate probably increased. Your mind started racing. They were talking about me. They think I'm incompetent. That smirk was definitely about the mistake I made last week. I bet they're all laughing at me behind my back. Within seconds, you've gone from neutral to stressed, maybe even angry or embarrassed. But here's the critical question. Do you actually know what they were talking about? Do you have any evidence that their conversation was about you at all? Of course not. But your mind doesn't care about evidence when it's building a story. It just cares about protection. And the fastest way to protect you is to assume the worst and prepare for battle. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them." That hallway interaction didn't hurt you. Your interpretation of it did. Let me give you another example. Your friend doesn't text you back for 3 days. What's your immediate thought? They're mad at me. I must have said something wrong. They're probably talking to everyone except me. Your mood shifts. You start analyzing every recent interaction, looking for clues about what you did wrong. But what if they just lost their phone? What if they're dealing with a family emergency? What if they're going through something heavy and don't have the emotional bandwidth to text anyone back? What if they saw your message, meant to respond, and then got distracted by life? Same situation, completely different interpretations. One makes you suffer, the other sets you free. The Stoics understood something profound. Most of our pain comes not from what happens to us, but from the stories we tell ourselves about what happens to us. And here's the liberating part. Those stories are optional. You don't have to believe the first interpretation your mind offers. You can pause. You can question it. You can ask yourself, is this definitely true? Or is this just one possible explanation? This pause, this moment of stepping back from your automatic interpretation, is where your power lives. It's the space between stimulus and response, between what happens and how you react. And in that space, you get to choose. Here's how to practice this in real life. The next time something bothers you, and I mean anything, from a rude comment to a delayed response to someone cutting you off in traffic, stop and ask yourself these 3 questions. First, what story am I telling myself about this situation? Second, is this story definitely true, or is it just one possible interpretation? Third, what's a more neutral way to see this? Let's practice. That coworker who didn't say hello this morning, the story might be, they're ignoring me because they don't like me. A more neutral interpretation. They seem preoccupied. Maybe they didn't see me. Or maybe they're dealing with something stressful. The person who cut you off in traffic, to the story, might be, what an inconsiderate jerk who thinks they own the road. A more neutral interpretation. They seem to be in a hurry. Maybe there's an emergency. Or maybe they genuinely didn't see me. Your partner, who seemed distant last night, the story might be, they're pulling away from me. Our relationship is in trouble. A more neutral interpretation. They seem tired or stressed about something. Maybe work was difficult, or maybe they just need some quiet time. Notice what happens when you shift your interpretation. The external situation hasn't changed at all, but your internal experience becomes completely different. You're not denying reality or making excuses for bad behavior. You're just refusing to automatically assume the worst. This is the first key to Stoic silence, becoming aware of the stories you tell yourself and learning to question them before they drag you into unnecessary suffering. The ancient Stoics called this the discipline of perception. It's the practice of seeing clearly rather than seeing through the filter of your fears, insecurities, and past wounds. And the more you practice it, the more you realize that most of the things that used to bother you were never about you at all. But here's where it gets interesting. Once you start questioning your perceptions, you naturally begin to wonder, okay, so if I can't control how I interpret things, and I can't control what other people do, what exactly can I control? That's where we're going next. So imagine this. You're lying in bed at 2 a.m. and your mind is racing. You're thinking about the presentation you have to give tomorrow. What if you mess up? What if they ask a question you can't answer? What if your boss thinks you're incompetent? What if this affects your promotion chances? Your body is tense, your stomach is in knots, and you're nowhere close to sleep. You're suffering, and you haven't even gotten to work yet. You're torturing yourself over things that haven't happened and might never happen. This is what happens when you don't understand the circle of control, one of the most powerful concepts in all of Stoicism. Here's the truth that will set you free. There are only two types of things in your life: things you control and things you don't control. And most of your suffering comes from trying to control things that aren't yours to control. Let's break down that presentation anxiety. What can you actually control? You can control how well you prepare. You can control how much you practice. You can control getting enough sleep the night before. You can control your posture, your breathing, and your tone of voice during the presentation. What can't you control? You can't control whether they like your ideas. You can't control if someone asks a difficult question. You can't control your boss's mood that day. You can't control whether you get promoted. You can't control how they perceive you, no matter how perfectly you perform. Here's what most people do. They spend 90% of their energy worrying about the things they can't control, and 10% of their energy on the things they can control. Then they wonder why they feel powerless and anxious all the time. Stoicism flips this. It says, pour 100% of your energy into what's yours to control, and let go of everything else. Not because you don't care about the outcome, but because obsessing over it doesn't improve your chances. It just makes you miserable. Let me give you a different example. Your relationship. What can you control? You can control how honestly you communicate. You can control how present you are when you're together. You can control whether you keep your promises. You can control your own growth, your own healing, your own contribution to the partnership. What can't you control? You can't control whether they love you back. You can't control their past, their baggage, or their triggers. You can't control how they interpret your actions. You can't control whether they choose to stay or leave. You can't control whether they appreciate what you do for them. This doesn't mean you stop caring or stop trying. It means you stop trying to carry someone else's half of the relationship. It means you focus on being the best partner you can be, and you let them be responsible for their own choices. Here's another one. Your career. What can you control? Your effort, your attitude, your willingness to learn. You can control how you treat your colleagues, how you handle feedback, how you show up even on difficult days. You can control your skills, your network, your reputation for reliability. What can't you control? Whether you get the promotion, whether your company downsizes, whether your boss likes you personally. You can't control office politics, economic downturns, or industry changes. You can't control other people's decisions about your future. The Stoic approach. Give everything to your effort, your preparation, your character. Show up as your best self consistently. Then let the chips fall where they may, knowing you did your part. Epictetus had a beautiful metaphor for this. He said you're like an archer. You can control your stance, your aim, your technique, the strength of your pull. That's your job. But once you release the arrow, whether it hits the target depends on wind, weather, and 1,000 other variables you can't control. Most people spend their whole lives trying to control the wind instead of perfecting their aim. Here's how to practice this immediately. Make 2 lists. In the first column, write down everything that's been stressing you out lately. In the second column, honestly assess. Is this something I can control or something I can't control? You might be surprised. That fight you had with your friend last week, you can't control their reaction or whether they forgive you, but you can control whether you apologize sincerely. That job interview you're worried about, you can't control their decision, but you can control your preparation. Your health scare, you can't control the diagnosis, but you can control following your treatment plan. Your teenager's attitude, you can't control their choices, but you can control your response and the boundaries you set. Once you make this distinction, something magical happens. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstances, and you start feeling like the author of your own experience. You stop wasting energy on things that were never yours to fix, and you start investing that energy in the things that actually matter. But here's the paradox. The less you try to control outcomes, the more influence you actually have. When you focus purely on your effort and your character, people notice. When you stop needing specific results, you perform better. When you stop trying to force things, they often flow more naturally. This is what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, wanting what happens instead of trying to make happen what you want. It's not passive, it's powerfully active in the right direction. And that brings us to the next key. What do you do when you're clear about what you can control, but your emotions are still running wild? How do you stay centered when everything in your body wants to react? Here's a scene that probably feels familiar. Someone says something that hits you the wrong way. Maybe it's criticism, maybe it's a snide comment, maybe it's just the wrong tone at the wrong moment. And instantly, I mean within milliseconds, your body reacts. Your heart rate spikes, your jaw clenches. Heat rises in your chest. Your mind immediately starts crafting a response, a defense, a counterattack. And before you even realize what's happening, words are coming out of your mouth. Words you might regret. Words that escalate instead of resolve. Words that make everything worse. Later, when you've calmed down, you think, "Why did I say that? That's not who I want to be. I know better than this." But in the moment, it felt like you had no choice. Like the reaction was automatic, inevitable, out of your control. But here's what the Stoics discovered. There's always a space, a gap, a moment between what happens to you and how you respond. And in that space lives all of your power. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, put it perfectly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Most people live their entire lives without ever noticing this space. They go straight from trigger to reaction, stimulus to response, without any conscious choice in between. Someone pushes their button, and they explode. Someone criticizes them, and they defend. Someone challenges them, and they fight back. But the person who has learned to be unbothered, they've learned to find that space and live in it. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in real life. You're in a meeting, and a colleague makes a comment that undermines your idea. In the old version of you, the words would be out of your mouth before you could stop them. "Actually, that's not what I meant at all." Or, "I think you misunderstood." Or worse, something sarcastic and cutting. But the new version of you, the version that understands the space, you feel the trigger. You notice your body's reaction. You feel the urge to defend, to explain, to justify. And then you pause. You take a breath. You let the feeling exist without immediately acting on it. And in that pause, you get to choose. Is this worth responding to? Will my reaction improve the situation or make it worse? What would serve the bigger picture here? What would serve my peace? Maybe you choose to respond, but now it's from a calm place. I can see how it might come across that way. Let me clarify what I meant. Maybe you choose not to respond at all, recognizing that some battles aren't worth fighting. Maybe you choose to address it privately later. The point isn't what you choose. The point is that you're choosing instead of just reacting. Here's another example. Your partner says something that hurts your feelings. The automatic response might be to hurt them back, to get defensive, to explain why they're wrong to feel that way. But if you can find the space, you might pause and realize, they're probably not trying to hurt me. They're probably expressing their own pain or frustration. How can I respond to what they're really saying instead of just reacting to how they said it? This is revolutionary. Most relationship conflicts happen not because of what people are trying to communicate, but because of how they react to each other's reactions. It's a chain reaction of triggers that escalates until nobody remembers what the original issue was about. But when one person learns to find the space, to pause between their partner's trigger and their own response, the whole dynamic changes. So how do you find this space? How do you slow down something that feels so automatic? First, you have to start noticing when you're triggered. This sounds obvious, but most people are so used to going straight from stimulus to reaction that they don't even realize it's happening. The trigger hits, and they're already in full reaction mode before they're consciously aware that anything happened. So practice awareness. Start paying attention to your body's early warning signals. For some people, it's a tightness in the chest. For others, it's a clenching in the jaw or a heat rising in the face. For some, it's that immediate urge to speak, to defend, to prove a point. Whatever your signal is, learn to recognize it. And when you feel it, that's your cue to pause. Second, use your breath as an anchor. When you notice you're triggered, take one deep, slow breath before you do anything else. This isn't mystical or complicated. It's neuroscience. Deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms your body's stress response and gives your prefrontal cortex a chance to come back online. Third, ask yourself one simple question. What would the person I want to be do right now? Not the person you are in your worst moments, but the person you are in your best moments. The person you respect. The person you're proud to be. This question shifts you from reactive mode to intentional mode. It reminds you that you have a choice, and it connects you to your values instead of your impulses. Let me give you a personal example. I used to be terrible at receiving feedback. If someone criticized my work, even constructively, my immediate reaction was to defend myself, to explain why they were wrong, to justify my choices. It was automatic and exhausting. Then I started practicing this pause. When someone would give me feedback, I'd feel that familiar urge to defend myself. But instead of speaking immediately, I'd take a breath and ask myself, what would the person I want to be do right now? The person I want to be would listen, would consider the feedback, would ask questions to understand their perspective better, would thank them for caring enough to help me improve. And gradually, that became my natural response. Not because I forced myself to be different, but because I practiced choosing my response instead of just reacting. This is what the Stoics meant when they talked about self-discipline. Not the grim, white-knuckled kind of discipline, but the discipline of conscious choice. The discipline of stepping into the space between what happens to you and how you respond. And here's what happens when you start living in that space. People notice. They start to see you as someone who's unshakable, someone who can handle pressure, someone who doesn't get rattled easily. Not because you don't feel things, but because you don't let your feelings make your decisions for you. But this raises an interesting question. What do you do with all that emotional energy when you're not immediately reacting to everything? How do you stay centered when you're feeling a lot, but expressing very little? That's where the power of strategic silence comes in. There's a moment in every heated conversation where you have the perfect comeback. You know exactly what to say to put the other person in their place. The words are right there, sharp and ready. You can feel how good it would feel to let them fly. And then, if you're wise, you don't say them. This isn't weakness. This isn't being passive or letting people walk all over you. This is strategic silence, one of the most powerful tools in the Stoic arsenal. Let me tell you about a time this saved my entire relationship. My partner and I were having one of those fights where you're not really fighting about the thing you think you're fighting about. On the surface, it was about household chores, but underneath, it was about feeling unappreciated, about different love languages, about old wounds that had never quite healed. The conversation was escalating. We were both getting defensive. And then they said something that hit me right in my deepest insecurity. Every fiber of my being wanted to hit back, to say the thing I knew would hurt them just as much. I opened my mouth to speak. The words were ready, and then I stopped. Not because I was scared, not because I didn't have a response, but because I realized that saying what I wanted to say would end the conversation and possibly the relationship. It would win the battle and lose the war. So I closed my mouth. I took a breath. I said, "I need a few minutes to think about what you just said." And in those few minutes, everything shifted. The heat went out of the moment. We both had time to remember that we love each other, that we're on the same team, that the goal isn't to be right, but to understand each other. When I came back, I said something completely different than what I'd planned. I said, "I think we're both feeling unappreciated right now. Can we talk about that instead of who did or didn't do the dishes?" That one moment of strategic silence probably saved us months of hurt and resentment. Here's what most people don't understand. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It's a form of communication. It says, "This moment is important enough for me to think before I speak." It says, "I care more about resolution than being right." It says, "I'm secure enough in myself that I don't need to win every exchange." Strategic silence serves multiple purposes. First, it prevents you from saying things you can't take back. We've all been there. The heat of the moment when you say something cutting, something designed to hurt, something that crosses a line you didn't even know was there. Later, you apologize, but the words are out there. They've done their damage. Strategic silence protects you from your own worst impulses. Second, silence often accomplishes what words cannot. When someone is trying to bait you into a reaction, trying to get you angry or defensive, the most powerful response is often no response at all. You refuse to play their game. You refuse to give them the reaction they're fishing for. I learned this lesson in a professional setting. There was a colleague who seemed to enjoy making little digs at me in meetings. Nothing overt enough to call out directly, but enough to be annoying. My first instinct was to respond in kind, to show everyone that I wasn't going to take it. But then I tried something different. The next time they made one of their comments, I just looked at them calmly for a moment, then continued with what I was saying as if they hadn't spoken at all. The effect was immediate and powerful. The room felt the awkwardness of their comment. People noticed that I didn't take the bait. And after a few meetings of this, the comments stopped altogether. They'd lost their power because I'd refused to give them the reaction that made them worthwhile. Third, strategic silence gives you time to respond from your values rather than your emotions. In that space of silence, you can ask yourself, what outcome am I trying to create here? What would serve the relationship? What would serve my own growth? What would I be proud of tomorrow? This doesn't mean you never speak up. It doesn't mean you become a doormat or let people mistreat you. It means you choose your battles carefully. And when you do engage, you engage intentionally. Sometimes strategic silence looks like not responding to every criticism. Sometimes it looks like letting someone else have the last word when you know continuing the conversation will only make things worse. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly while someone vents their frustration, knowing that they need to be heard more than they need to be corrected. But here's where it gets really interesting. Strategic silence is also about knowing when to speak. There are moments when silence would be cowardice, when speaking up is the brave and necessary thing to do. The key is consciousness, making an intentional choice rather than just reacting. Let me give you a framework for this. Before you speak in any charged situation, ask yourself these questions. Will my words improve the situation, or make it worse? Am I speaking from love and truth, or from ego and hurt? Am I trying to communicate or trying to win? Will I be proud of these words tomorrow? If the answers point toward silence, stay quiet. If they point toward speaking, then speak, but from that centered, intentional place rather than from reactivity. Here's what happens when you master strategic silence. People start to respect your words more because you use them more carefully. When you do speak, people listen because they know you're not just making noise. Your relationships improve because you're not constantly escalating conflicts. Your reputation grows because you're seen as someone who's thoughtful, measured, and wise. And most importantly, you start to trust yourself more. You know that you can handle difficult situations without losing your center. You know that you have self-control. You know that your peace is more important than being right. But strategic silence is just one form of a deeper practice. Sometimes the most powerful silence isn't about choosing not to speak to others. It's about choosing not to speak to yourself. About quieting the internal commentary that keeps you stirred up even when the external world is calm. That's where we're going next. Here's something that might surprise you. The person who talks to you most throughout the day isn't your boss, your partner, your friends, or your family. It's you. You have a running commentary going in your head from the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep. And for most people, that voice isn't very kind. Listen to yourself for just a few minutes. Notice what that internal voice is saying. I should have said something different back there. I look terrible today. Why did I do that? That was so stupid. They probably think I'm incompetent. I'm never going to figure this out. This is your inner critic, and it's probably your harshest companion. It critiques your appearance, your performance, your decisions, your relationships. It replays your mistakes and rehearses your failures. It compares you to everyone else and finds you lacking. And here's the crazy part. You wouldn't let another person talk to you the way you talk to yourself. If someone else said to you what you say to yourself, you'd probably end the friendship. But because it's your own voice, you think you have to listen to it. You think it's telling you the truth. You think it's helping you improve or protecting you from making mistakes. Most of the time, it's doing neither. Most of the time, it's just creating unnecessary suffering. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, literally the most powerful man in the world at the time, spent much of his personal journal arguing with his own thoughts. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't talking about controlling what thoughts arise. That's mostly impossible. He was talking about controlling how much authority you give those thoughts, how much you let them dictate your experience. Let me give you an example. You're walking into a social gathering where you don't know many people. Your inner critic immediately starts up. Everyone here probably has more interesting jobs than you. You're going to say something awkward. They can probably tell you're nervous. You don't fit in here. You should just leave. No, you can't stop these thoughts from arising. They're automatic, conditioned responses based on past experiences and fears. But you can choose not to believe them. You can recognize them as just thoughts, not facts. You can treat them like background noise rather than important information. Here's a technique that changed my life. Start treating your thoughts like a radio playing in the background. Sometimes the radio plays a song you like. Sometimes it plays something annoying. Sometimes it's just static. But you don't have to turn it off. You just don't have to dance to every song. When that inner critic starts up, instead of arguing with it or trying to shut it down, just notice it and think, oh, there's that voice again. Interesting. Then gently redirect your attention to something more useful. The conversation you're in, the task at hand, the feeling of your breath. This isn't about positive thinking or replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It's about changing your relationship with your thoughts entirely. It's about recognizing that thoughts are just mental events, not reality. They're not commands you have to obey or truths you have to accept. Let me give you another example. You made a mistake at work. Nothing major, just a small oversight that caused a minor inconvenience. Your inner critic goes into overdrive. You're so careless. Everyone thinks you're incompetent now. You're probably going to get fired. You never pay attention to details. You're not cut out for this job. The old you might spiral into anxiety, spending hours replaying the mistake and imagining worst-case scenarios. But the new you, the you that understands the inner critic, recognizes what's happening. There's my brain trying to protect me by catastrophizing. It thinks if it punishes me enough, I won't make mistakes in the future. But that's not actually how learning works. And then you can respond more rationally. I made a small mistake. It's been corrected. I'll be more careful next time. This isn't a reflection of my overall competence or worth as a person. Same mistake, completely different internal experience. Here's another powerful technique. Start noticing the tone and language your inner critic uses. Is it harsh, absolute, catastrophic? Does it use words like always, never, terrible, disaster? Real wisdom doesn't talk that way. Real wisdom is gentle, nuanced, helpful. It says things like, that didn't go as well as I hoped. What can I learn from this? It doesn't say, you always mess everything up. When you notice that harsh, absolute tone, you can recognize it as a signal that you're not dealing with wisdom. You're dealing with fear, masquerading as insight. But here's the deepest level of this practice. Learning to create space between you and your thoughts. Most people are so identified with their thinking that they can't tell the difference between themselves and their mental commentary. They think, I'm anxious, when really, I'm having anxious thoughts. They think, I'm a failure, when really, I'm thinking self-critical thoughts. This might sound like semantics, but it's profound. When you realize that you are not your thoughts, that you're the awareness that observes thoughts, everything changes. Thoughts lose their grip on you. You stop taking them so personally. You stop believing everything you think. Here's a simple practice to develop this awareness. Throughout the day, when you notice your mind chattering, gently say to yourself, I notice I'm thinking about, and fill in the blank. I notice I'm thinking about what I should have said in that meeting. I notice I'm thinking about whether they like me. I notice I'm thinking self-critical thoughts. This simple phrase creates space. It reminds you that thoughts are things you experience, not things you are. Over time, this practice develops what the Stoics called the view from above, the ability to step back and observe your own mental patterns with some detachment and compassion. You start to see how much of your suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from what you tell yourself about what happens to you. And once you develop this skill, the ability to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them, you naturally begin to cultivate something even more powerful. The ability to be present with what is, rather than lost in mental commentary about what is. That's where we're going next. There's a particular kind of person who stands out in any room. They're not necessarily the loudest or the most charismatic. In fact, they might be relatively quiet. But when they're with you, they're really with you. When they listen, they're really listening. When they speak, their words have weight because they come from a place of genuine attention. These people have mastered something most of us struggle with, the art of being present. And presence, it turns out, is a form of silence. Silence from the constant mental chatter that usually keeps us half absent from our own lives. Most of us are living in 3 different time zones simultaneously. Part of our mind is in the past, replaying conversations, analyzing what went wrong, wishing we'd done something differently. Part of our mind is in the future, planning, worrying, anticipating problems that may never come. And only a small part of our attention is actually here, in this moment, with what's actually happening right now. This scattered attention isn't just exhausting, it's also why we miss most of our lives. We're physically present, but mentally elsewhere. We're in the conversation, but thinking about our to-do list. We're with our loved ones, but distracted by our phones, our problems, our plans. The Stoics understood that presence is both a discipline and a gift. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present, not because the past and future don't matter, but because they don't exist anywhere except in your mind." The only place you can actually live, act, and experience anything is right here, right now. But presence isn't just about paying attention to what's happening around you. It's also about being present to what's happening inside you, your emotions, your reactions, your physical sensations, without immediately trying to change them or escape from them. Let me give you a concrete example. You're in a difficult conversation with someone you care about. They're expressing frustration with you, and you can feel yourself getting defensive. Your heart is beating faster, your jaw is tightening, and your mind is already formulating your rebuttal. Most people in this moment are anywhere but present. They're in the future, thinking about what they're going to say next. They're in the past, remembering other times this person upset them. They're in their head, building their case for why they're right, and the other person is wrong. But what if instead you stayed present? What if you noticed your physical reaction without immediately acting on it? What if you listened not just to their words, but to the emotion underneath their words? What if you let yourself feel defensive without becoming defensive? This is presence in action. You're not suppressing your reaction or pretending you don't have one. You're simply staying aware of it while also staying aware of what's actually happening in the conversation. And something magical occurs when you do this. First, you hear things you would have missed if you were busy preparing your defense. You might hear that underneath their frustration is hurt, or fear, or a desire to be understood. You might realize they're not attacking your character. They're expressing their own pain. Second, your own reaction starts to settle naturally. When you don't immediately act on defensiveness, it loses its urgency. When you don't feed the emotional fire with mental commentary, it burns itself out. Third, you respond from a deeper place. Instead of reacting from your triggered emotions, you can respond from your values, from love, from wisdom. Here's another example. You're stuck in traffic, running late for an important appointment. Your automatic response might be to get frustrated, to grip the steering wheel, to curse at the other drivers, to let your mind race with worry about being late and what that might mean. But what if you use this moment to practice presence instead? What if you noticed your frustration without judging it? What if you felt your body's tension without adding mental commentary about how terrible this situation is? You might take a deep breath and think, this is what's happening right now. I'm in traffic. I'm going to be late. Getting upset won't change the traffic, but it will make this experience more miserable for me. You might use this time to practice breathing deeply, to listen to music you enjoy, to call someone you love, hands-free, or simply to be quiet and still in a busy world. Same external situation, completely different internal experience. That's the power of presence. But presence is also about the quality of your attention when you're with other people. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone who was clearly thinking about something else? Their body was there, but their mind was elsewhere. How did that feel? Probably not great. Now think about a time when someone gave you their full attention. They looked at you when you spoke. They asked questions that showed they were really listening. They weren't checking their phone or glancing around the room. How did that feel? Probably amazing. This is one of the greatest gifts you can give another person, your undivided attention. And it's also one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, Because when you're fully present, you actually experience your life instead of just passing through it. Here's how to practice this immediately. For the next hour, try this. Whatever you're doing, be fully there. If you're eating, taste your food. If you're walking, feel your feet on the ground. If you're listening to music, really listen. If you're talking to someone, be completely with them. Notice how often your mind wants to drift to something else. Notice the pull to check your phone, to think about your problems, to plan what you're going to do next. Don't judge these impulses, just notice them, and gently bring your attention back to what's happening right now. This is harder than it sounds, but it's also more rewarding than you might expect. When you're fully present, colors seem brighter, conversations seem richer, and even mundane activities become more satisfying. The Stoics practiced presence not just as a nice-to-have skill, but as a fundamental discipline for living well. They understood that life only happens in the present moment, and if you're not present, you're not really living. You're just existing on autopilot. But here's where presence becomes even more powerful. When you're fully present, you naturally become more discerning about what deserves your attention and what doesn't. You start to recognize the difference between what's important and what's just noise. And that leads us to our next key, the art of selective attention. Imagine your mind is like a smartphone with a battery that drains throughout the day. Every time you get upset about something, you lose battery. Every time you worry about something you can't control, you lose battery. Every time you replay an argument or rehearse a confrontation, you lose battery. Now imagine you could be more selective about what you allow to drain your battery. What if you could save your mental energy for the things that actually matter, instead of letting it leak away on petty annoyances and imaginary problems? This is what the Stoics called selective attention, the practice of consciously choosing what deserves your mental energy and what doesn't. It's not about ignoring reality or pretending problems don't exist. It's about being strategic with your attention, because attention is one of your most valuable resources. Let me paint you a picture of how most people spend their mental energy. They wake up and immediately check their phone, flooding their mind with news, social media, messages, notifications. Before they've even had coffee, their brain is trying to process dozens of different inputs, most of which don't actually require their attention or action. Then they go through their day reacting to everything. Someone cuts them off in traffic. There goes 20 minutes of mental energy replaying the incident and feeling annoyed. A coworker makes a passive-aggressive comment. There goes another hour analyzing what they meant and planning what to say next time. Their ex posts something on social media. There goes an evening of overthinking and emotional turbulence. The news reports something upsetting. There goes their peace of mind, even though the event has no direct impact on their life and there's nothing they can do about it. By the end of the day, they're mentally exhausted, not because they did anything particularly demanding, but because they scattered their attention across 1,000 different things that didn't actually deserve it. The Stoic approach is radically different. It says, your attention is precious. Guard it carefully. Don't give it away to every person, situation, or thought that demands it. Here's how this works in practice. You see something on social media that irritates you, a political post you disagree with, a humble brag from someone you know, an argument in the comments section. Your first impulse might be to engage, to correct the record, to add your voice to the mix. But before you do, ask yourself, is this worth my mental energy? Will engaging with this improve my life or the lives of people I care about? Or am I just feeding my ego's need to be right? 9 times out of 10, the honest answer is that it's not worth it. So you scroll past. You save your energy for something that actually matters. Or you're at work and there's office drama brewing. People are gossiping about someone else's personal life, or complaining about a decision management made, or speculating about layoffs that might never happen. You could join in. You could add your opinion, share your concerns, contribute to the collective anxiety. But instead, you ask yourself, does participating in this conversation serve any useful purpose? Does it solve any problems or just create more drama? If it's just drama, you politely excuse yourself. You find something more productive to focus on. You save your mental energy for your actual work, your actual relationships, your actual problems that you can actually solve. This isn't about being antisocial or uncaring. It's about being intentional with your attention. It's about recognizing that every moment you spend focused on something you can't control or don't care about is a moment you're not spending on something you can control and do care about. Let me give you a personal example. I used to get pulled into every online argument about topics I cared about. If someone posted something I disagreed with, I felt compelled to correct them. If there was an injustice in the news, I felt obligated to share my outrage. I thought I was being engaged, informed, socially conscious. But really, I was just exhausting myself with things that were outside my circle of influence. I wasn't changing anyone's mind. I wasn't solving any problems. I wasn't making the world better. I was just draining my own energy and adding to the noise. Now I'm much more selective. I ask myself, can I actually influence this situation? Do I have something genuinely useful to contribute? Or am I just venting my emotions in public? If I can't influence it and don't have something useful to contribute, I focus my energy elsewhere, on my relationships, on my work, on causes where I can make a real difference, on problems I can actually solve. This doesn't mean I don't care about the world. It means I care enough to be strategic about how I engage with it. Here's another area where selective attention is crucial. Other people's opinions of you. Most people spend enormous amounts of mental energy trying to manage how others perceive them. They replay conversations, analyzing whether they said the right thing. They worry about what people think of their appearance, their choices, their life decisions. But here's a liberating truth. Most people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. They're too busy worrying about what you think of them. And even when people do have opinions about you, those opinions say more about them than they do about you. Their judgments are filtered through their own experiences, their own insecurities, their own values and priorities. The Stoic approach is to be selective about which opinions you value. The opinions of people you respect, people who know you well, people who want the best for you, those are worth considering. The opinions of strangers, casual acquaintances, or people who don't have your best interests at heart, those you can let go. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does." He's not advocating for being oblivious or uncaring. He's suggesting that constantly monitoring other people's actions and opinions is a waste of precious mental energy. Here's how to practice selective attention starting today. Before you engage with any piece of information, whether it's news, social media, gossip, or someone's opinion, ask yourself 3 questions. First, can I influence this situation or outcome? If not, consider whether it's worth your mental energy. Second, does engaging with this align with my values and priorities? If not, let it go. Third, will I be glad I spent my time and attention on this tomorrow? If not, find something more worthwhile. This isn't about becoming indifferent or disconnected. It's about becoming intentional. It's about saving your mental energy for the people and causes and problems that actually matter to you, instead of letting it drain away on every minor irritation and distant concern. When you master selective attention, something wonderful happens. You become more effective because you're focusing your energy on fewer things. You become more peaceful because you're not constantly reacting to external chaos. And you become more present because you're not scattered across a dozen different mental channels at once. But there's one final aspect of Stoic silence that ties everything together, the deepest and most powerful form of quiet strength. It's the silence that comes not from technique or practice, but from a fundamental shift in how you see yourself and your place in the world. There's a moment in everyone's growth when something profound shifts. You stop needing to prove yourself. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing everyone to understand you, like you, or validate your choices. You reach a place of inner security so deep that external approval becomes nice, but not necessary. This is the ultimate form of Stoic silence. Not the silence of suppression or avoidance, but the silence that comes from being so grounded in who you are that you don't need to constantly announce it to the world. Think about the people you most admire. I'm willing to bet they have this quality. They don't boast about their accomplishments. They don't need to be the center of attention. They don't get defensive when someone disagrees with them. They speak when they have something valuable to contribute, but they're equally comfortable with quiet. There's a power in this that's unmistakable, but difficult to describe. It's not passive. These people often accomplish remarkable things. It's not cold. They're often deeply caring and compassionate. It's just secure. They know who they are, they know what they value, and they don't need external validation to confirm it. This kind of inner security is the end goal of all Stoic practice. All the other keys we've discussed, controlling your perception, focusing on what you can control, finding the space between trigger and response, using strategic silence, quieting internal commentary, staying present, and choosing where to direct your attention. All of these lead to this final destination. A place where you no longer need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. But how do you get there? How do you develop this kind of unshakable inner security? It starts with understanding where insecurity comes from in the first place. Most of our need to prove ourselves stems from early experiences where we learned that our worth was conditional. Maybe we had to perform to get love. Maybe we were criticized or rejected when we showed our true selves. Maybe we absorbed the message that we had to earn our place in the world. These experiences create what psychologists call approval addiction, a compulsive need for external validation that drives so much of our adult behavior. We work too hard to impress people who don't matter. We say yes when we mean no because we're afraid of disappointing others. We hide parts of ourselves that we think might not be acceptable. But here's what the Stoics understood. Your worth isn't something you earn. It's something you simply have by virtue of being human. You don't have to prove you deserve love, respect, or belonging. You don't have to be perfect, successful, or universally liked to have value. Marcus Aurelius, literally the most powerful person in his world, wrote in his private journal, "Remember that very little disturbs the wise person's tranquility. Nothing truly frightens them." He wasn't talking about external power or achievement. He was talking about internal security, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances or other people's opinions. This security develops gradually through practice and self-compassion. Every time you choose not to react defensively to criticism, you build it. Every time you let someone misunderstand you without rushing to correct them, you strengthen it. Every time you make a decision based on your values rather than what others might think, you deepen it. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. Imagine you're at a social gathering and someone makes a comment that could be interpreted as critical of a choice you've made. Maybe your career path, your relationship status, your lifestyle. The insecure response would be to immediately defend yourself, to explain your reasoning, to try to convince them that your choice was right. You might even attack their choice in return to level the playing field. But from a place of inner security, you might simply nod and say, "That's an interesting perspective," and then change the subject. Not because you don't care what they think, but because you don't need them to approve of your life for you to feel good about it. Or imagine you make a mistake at work, something visible that others notice. The insecure response would be to minimize it, make excuses, or blame external circumstances. You might lose sleep worrying about what people think and whether this affects your reputation. But from inner security, you acknowledge the mistake straightforwardly. I messed up here. I'll fix it and put systems in place to prevent it from happening again. You don't over-apologize or undertake responsibility. You deal with the practical consequences and move on, without your self-worth being tied to being perfect. This kind of security is incredibly attractive to others, even though, or perhaps because, it's not trying to be attractive. People are drawn to those who are comfortable with themselves. They trust people who don't seem to need anything from them. They respect those who can admit mistakes without falling apart. But the real gift isn't how others respond to your security. It's how it feels to live from this place. There's a profound peace that comes from not constantly needing to manage other people's perceptions of you. There's tremendous energy that gets freed up when you stop using your mental resources to maintain a defensive posture against the world. You begin to make decisions based on what genuinely serves your life, rather than what looks good to others. You start saying no to opportunities that don't align with your values, even if they're impressive on paper. You start saying yes to things that feel authentic, even if they're not what people expect from you. Your relationships become more genuine because you're not performing a version of yourself. You're simply being yourself. The people who like the real you stick around, and the people who don't, well, that's valuable information too. This doesn't mean you become indifferent to feedback or immune to hurt. It means you process these experiences differently. Criticism becomes information to consider rather than an attack to defend against. Rejection becomes redirection rather than a reflection of your worth. Here's how to begin cultivating this inner security today. Start practicing what I call radical self-acceptance. This means accepting all parts of yourself, not just the parts you're proud of, but the parts you're still working on. Your mistakes, your quirks, your imperfections, your past choices that you might handle differently now. This doesn't mean you stop growing or trying to improve. It means you stop making your self-worth conditional on being perfect. You start from a place of, I am fundamentally okay as I am, and I'm also committed to becoming the best version of myself. Practice this phrase. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Say it when you feel the urge to over-explain yourself. Say it when you're tempted to show off. Say it when someone's opinion of you feels more important than your opinion of yourself. And finally, remember that inner security isn't a destination you reach once and never lose. It's a practice you return to again and again. Some days you'll feel unshakable, and other days you'll notice old insecurities creeping back in. That's normal and human. The goal isn't to never feel insecure again. The goal is to recognize insecurity when it arises, treat it with compassion, and choose to act from your values rather than your fears. So here we are, at the end of our journey through the 8 keys to Stoic silence. We've explored how to master your perception, focus on what you can control, find the space between trigger and response, use strategic silence, quiet your inner commentary, cultivate presence, practice selective attention, and develop unshakable inner security. If you've stayed with me this far, you're already different than you were 70 minutes ago. You have tools now that you didn't have before. You have awareness that can change everything. But here's the thing about Stoic wisdom. It's not enough to understand it intellectually. You have to live it. You have to practice it in the small moments, the difficult conversations, the everyday frustrations that make up most of life. The next time someone tries to bait you into an argument, remember the space between trigger and response. The next time you catch yourself catastrophizing about something you can't control, remember the circle of control. The next time your inner critic starts its harsh commentary, remember that you are not your thoughts. This isn't about becoming perfect or never feeling triggered again. The Stoics weren't emotionless robots. They were human beings who learned to respond to life with wisdom instead of reacting with impulse. Epictetus, who we've quoted throughout this journey, spent much of his life as a slave. He understood suffering intimately. But he also understood something more important, that no external circumstance, no matter how difficult, has the power to disturb your inner peace unless you give it that power. Marcus Aurelius, who had the weight of an empire on his shoulders, wrote his philosophical reflections not as abstract theories, but as practical reminders to himself about how to live well under pressure. These weren't men who lived easy lives. They were men who chose to find strength in the midst of challenge, peace in the midst of chaos, and wisdom in the midst of uncertainty. And that choice is available to you too, right now, today, in the next difficult conversation you have, the next setback you face, the next moment when life doesn't go according to your plans. The path of Stoic silence isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, the version of yourself you are in your wisest, calmest, most centered moments. The version of yourself you respect. That person has been inside you all along, waiting for you to choose them over your reactivity, your defensiveness, your need to control what can't be controlled. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you choose that person. Every time you respond with wisdom instead of emotion, you become that person. Every time you stay silent when silence serves better than words, you embody that person. The world needs more people like this. People who don't add to the noise and chaos, but who stand as calm centers in the storm. People who lift others up instead of tearing them down. People who respond to conflict with wisdom instead of defensiveness. You can be one of these people. Not someday when you've figured everything out, but starting right now. With the next choice you make. With the next response you give. With the next opportunity, you have to choose peace over drama, wisdom over reactivity, silence over unnecessary words. This is your invitation. This is your beginning. The person you want to be is not some distant future version of yourself. They're available to you in this moment, in this choice, in this breath. Act as if nothing bothers you, and gradually you'll discover that very little does. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've become unshakable. The silence is waiting for you. Step into it.